Hey man, what are you doing out here?
Just relaxing in the shade.
People called about you. Let me see some ID.
I'm not giving ID for sitting in a park.
Then stand up, I'm gonna cuff you.
Cuff me for what?
You're refusing a lawful order.
Lawful? Nah, man. You picked the wrong guy. FBI.
Travis Holloway spent 9 years working for the Phoenix Police Department, and during that time, Internal Affairs wrote up 17 official complaints against him. Despite this troubling track record, his bosses kept sending him to training classes instead of letting him go. The numbers tell a clear story. Out of those 17 complaints, 13 had one thing in common. Holloway was stopping black people in parks and other outdoor areas for doing absolutely nothing wrong. He questioned a man who was just reading on a bench about loitering. He asked a woman who'd been jogging and was stretching if she could prove she lived in the neighborhood. He grilled a kid shooting hoops by himself about whether he was in a gang. Every single time paperwork got filed, Holloway sat through more training and nothing changed. Then one November day in Phoenix, Holloway's habit of assuming black people don't belong in public parks finally caught up with him. He confronted someone whose federal badge carried a lot more weight than his local police authority, and that confrontation ended his career for good, cost Phoenix $5,300,000, and showed the world how a department chose training paperwork over real discipline through 16 previous warnings. On that particular day, a 38-year-old FBI special agent named Darius Mitchell was sitting at a covered picnic table in Desert Ridge Park. He was enjoying some chips and water on his day off, dressed in workout gear after hitting the gym that morning. He wasn't armed, his credentials and service weapon were locked safely in his car. There was no crime happening, no park rules being broken, no suspicious activity whatsoever. Just a federal agent who'd spent 15 years going after civil rights violations, taking a peaceful break in a public area on a gorgeous Arizona afternoon. But when Holloway saw him, 9 years of automatic assumptions kicked in. He couldn't wrap his head around the idea that someone might just be enjoying a public space legally, so he walked over with his mind already made up, and that would turn this encounter into a federal case study on constitutional violations. Before I go on, where are you watching from? If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like this need to reach more people, and your support helps us shine light on the truth. Phoenix, Arizona. Desert Ridge is a newer area in North Phoenix where the parks have modern covered shelters, walking paths, sports fields, and family-friendly features. These parks welcome everyone, people on their lunch breaks, parents with kids, athletes training, anyone looking for some outdoor space in a city where the summer heat makes these spring and fall days feel like gold. November 25th brought beautiful weather, temperatures in the mid-70s, blue skies, perfect for being outside. That Tuesday at 3:11 in the afternoon, the park had its usual mix of people using the space exactly as intended. Darius Mitchell had chosen federal law enforcement because he wanted to fight the injustices he'd seen growing up in South Phoenix. His mom was a teacher, his dad worked for the Postal Service, and they'd raised him believing that systems could change if people worked to fix them from the inside. Darius did well at Arizona State studying criminal justice. He graduated top of his class at the FBI Academy in Quantico, then came back to Phoenix determined to hold people accountable, badge or no badge. He'd been with the FBI's Phoenix field office for 15 years, spending most of that time in the Civil Rights Division. His job was investigating police misconduct, building federal cases against officers who violated people's constitutional rights, and deposing hundreds of officers who claimed they policed without bias while their records told a different story. That Tuesday was Darius's day off. He'd gotten an early workout in, hit the gym hard, and decided to unwind before heading home. He'd stopped at a convenience store for some water and chips, then drove to his favorite park. Simple plan, find some shade, relax, enjoy the weather. He found a covered pavilion, picked a picnic table, set down his snacks, and settled in for a peaceful break. He had on a blue sleeveless athletic shirt, black shorts, running shoes, and a dark baseball cap, standard workout clothes for Phoenix in November. His FBI credentials were locked in his car's center console next to his service weapon. He was completely off-duty, completely unarmed, and completely entitled to be in a public space without having to explain himself to anyone. Darius opened his chips, drank his water, and watched people enjoying the park normally, kids playing on the grass, couples walking around, someone throwing a frisbee with their dog. Just peaceful afternoon activity in a public place. He'd been sitting there maybe 20 minutes when Officer Travis Holloway's patrol car rolled into the parking lot. Holloway represented a problem the department had struggled to address, even though the documentation made the solution pretty obvious. 9 years with Phoenix PD, 17 formal complaints, not spread out over decades, but packed into 9 years. And 13 of those 17 complaints showed the exact same bias: black people in public outdoor spaces being stopped and questioned for no legal reason. Complaint number 3, black man sitting on park grass reading the newspaper. Holloway demanded his ID and asked why he was there. The man lived right across the street. The result, community policing workshop. Complaint number 7, black woman stretching after her morning run. Holloway stopped her, asked if she lived nearby, suggested she might be checking out cars to break into. She ran there 5 days a week training for marathons. The result, fitness and recreation awareness training. Complaint number 11, black teenager shooting basketball by himself at a public court. Holloway questioned him about gang connections based on what he was wearing. The teenager was wearing his high school basketball uniform. The result, youth engagement seminar. 17 complaints, 13 showing the same automatic assumption that black people in parks don't belong there. Phoenix PD's response never changed. Document the complaint, assign some training, close the file. The training topics rotated, but nothing got better. Cultural competency after complaint 4. Implicit bias after complaint 8. Constitutional policing after complaint 12. Community engagement after complaint 15. Holloway went to every session, passed every test, signed every attendance sheet, went back on patrol, and kept making the same stops. That afternoon, Holloway was responding to a call about a suspicious person at Desert Ridge Park. The caller didn't describe any criminal activity. No threats were reported, no disturbance was mentioned, just someone feeling uncomfortable about someone else's presence. The caller was white. The person making them uncomfortable was black. This is the classic profile of calls that waste resources while creating constitutional violations. Holloway arrived at the park and immediately spotted Darius sitting at the picnic table. In Holloway's way of thinking, this looked like a situation that needed investigating. Black man sitting alone, must be homeless or planning something, must need to be questioned and probably told to move along. Holloway didn't see criminal behavior. He didn't notice park violations. He didn't register someone peacefully eating lunch. He just walked over with 9 years of assumptions guiding him. Do you think eating chips at a picnic table requires explaining yourself to police? Drop your answer below. Darius saw the patrol car and didn't think much of it at first. Police patrol parks regularly, normal presence, nothing concerning. Then Holloway got out and walked straight toward him with purpose, and Darius recognized that walk immediately. He'd seen it hundreds of times investigating civil rights cases, the walk of an officer who's already decided someone's guilty and just needs to figure out what to charge them with. Holloway's body camera captured everything that happened next, creating documentation that would end up as federal court evidence. "Hey man, what are you doing out here?" Not a greeting, an interrogation. Immediate questioning with an edge that demanded justification for being there. Darius kept his response calm and professional. He dealt with officers like this from the investigative side countless times, just relaxing in the shade, taking a break after my workout. Holloway moved closer, his body language aggressive. "People called about you, let me see some ID." There it was, the demand with no legal basis. No reasonable suspicion spelled out, no crime described, just people called, which isn't grounds for anything, combined with show me ID, which isn't lawful without reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. Darius knew Fourth Amendment law better than most federal judges. Terry v. Ohio, reasonable suspicion required. Sitting in a park isn't criminal activity. Someone calling because they're uncomfortable isn't reasonable suspicion. This demand was unlawful. "I'm not giving ID for sitting in a park. That's not a lawful request. You have no reasonable suspicion I've committed any crime." This is where 16 training programs should have prevented disaster. Hours of constitutional policing instruction, explicit teaching about unlawful ID demands, clear warnings about creating liability. Holloway's response proved he'd learned nothing. "Then stand up, I'm going to cuff you." Darius stood not because he was complying, but because he recognized escalation was coming, and standing on his own was safer than being forced to the ground. "Cuff me for what? I'm sitting in a public park. I haven't committed any crime. State your reasonable suspicion." "You're refusing a lawful order." Except the order wasn't lawful, that's the whole problem. Demanding ID without reasonable suspicion isn't lawful. Threatening arrest for asserting constitutional rights isn't lawful. This entire stop had no legal foundation, and Darius had reached his limit. He reached into his pocket. Holloway's hand moved toward his weapon, another problem worth examining. Darius pulled out his FBI credentials and badge, holding them where the body camera would capture them clearly. "Lawful? Nah man, you picked the wrong guy. FBI Special Agent Darius Mitchell, Phoenix Field Office, Civil Rights Division, and you just violated my Fourth Amendment rights on camera. Everything you did was unlawful. This goes to federal court." He displayed his credentials prominently, making sure there was no confusion. No way Holloway could claim later he didn't see them. I investigate civil rights violations for a living. Police misconduct is my specialization. You just gave me a textbook example of everything I prosecute other officers for doing. No reasonable suspicion, unlawful ID demand, threat of arrest for protected activity, all recorded on your body camera. Should federal agents need to show credentials to prevent unlawful arrest? Let me know what you think. Holloway's face went through several emotions fast: confusion at the unexpected response, recognition of who Darius was, dawning horror at what he'd just done. He'd threatened to arrest an FBI agent for eating chips in a park. You're FBI. 15 years, I build federal cases against officers who do exactly what you just did. Fourth Amendment violations, racial profiling, unlawful stops. This is literally my profession, and you just provided perfect evidence for a pattern and practice investigation. Another patrol car arrived, Officer Rachel Kim responding to the backup call Holloway had radioed before approaching Darius. Kim brought 12 years of experience and immediate recognition that something had gone catastrophically wrong. She'd partnered with Holloway once and requested never to work with him again after watching his pattern play out. Kim saw Darius's FBI credentials still displayed and understood instantly. "Sir, I apologize," Officer Holloway stepped back immediately. "He wouldn't show ID." Kim interrupted firmly. "Because he's not required to. He's sitting in a park. That's protected activity. No reasonable suspicion." She turned to Darius, genuine regret in her voice. "Agent Mitchell, can you tell me what happened?" Darius explained with the precision that comes from hundreds of depositions and federal court testimony. "I was sitting at that table eating chips and drinking water on my day off. Officer Holloway approached asking what I was doing. I explained I was relaxing. He claimed people called about me and demanded identification without reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. When I declined his unlawful request and cited constitutional grounds, he threatened to handcuff me for refusing what he called a lawful order that had no legal basis. I identified myself as FBI to prevent further escalation. Everything's documented on his body camera." A supervisor's vehicle arrived, Lieutenant Marcus Freeman, 22 years with Phoenix PD, 16 in command positions. He'd reviewed Holloway's complaint file multiple times. He'd recommended termination twice. Both recommendations were overruled with instructions for additional training. Now here was complaint 17, and the victim was FBI. Freeman spoke briefly with Kim, immediately called the FBI field office to notify them, pulled up Holloway's personnel file on his mobile computer showing 17 complaints with 13 following the same pattern. He watched the body camera footage from today's encounter. Then he made the decision that should have been made 14 complaints earlier. He approached Holloway with absolute finality in his expression. "Badge, service weapon, and body camera. You're suspended immediately pending termination proceedings." Holloway tried to justify. "Lieutenant, I responded to a suspicious person call." "You violated a federal agent's constitutional rights. You demanded identification without reasonable suspicion. You threatened arrest for asserting protected rights. You did this based on a call describing no criminal behavior. This is your 17th complaint in 9 years. 13 show identical bias against black people in public spaces. We've sent you to 16 separate training programs. Your behavior never changes. You're done. Badge, weapon, camera. Hand them over now." Holloway complied, removing his badge and unholstering his weapon with shaking hands. His 9-year career ending in the park because he couldn't imagine a black man eating chips belonged there. Freeman addressed Darius directly. "Agent Mitchell, I apologize on behalf of Phoenix Police Department. This stop was unconstitutional and should never have occurred. Officer Holloway will face immediate termination proceedings. I've notified your field office. We'll cooperate fully with any federal investigation or civil action you pursue." Darius gathered his chips and water. "Lieutenant, I've spent 15 years investigating cases exactly like this. Police misconduct, constitutional violations. I've reviewed hundreds of complaint files showing patterns that departments ignored. Now I've experienced it personally. 17 complaints, 13 showing racial bias in park stops. Phoenix PD's solution every time was training. That's documentation without accountability. $5,300,000 is what you're about to pay in federal court, and I'm going to ensure Officer Holloway's 17 complaint pattern becomes evidence of systemic failure to supervise despite overwhelming documentation requiring termination." By that evening, the incident had exploded across law enforcement networks and national media. FBI agent racially profiled in Phoenix Park. Federal civil rights investigator stopped while eating chips during lunch break. The agent who prosecutes these violations becomes victim of them. The FBI director issued a formal statement condemning the stop. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened an investigation into Phoenix PD's pattern and practice. Congressional representatives scheduled oversight hearings. Every federal agency that worked with Phoenix PD immediately distanced themselves. Federal law enforcement unions released statements supporting Darius. Darius filed his federal lawsuit 90 days after the incident, represented by the most skilled civil rights attorneys in the Southwest. The complaint named Officer Travis Holloway individually, his direct supervisors who had documented 17 complaints without meaningful action, and Phoenix Police Department for maintaining an institutional culture that tolerated documented patterns of racial profiling despite overwhelming evidence requiring intervention. The allegations were comprehensive and federally charged: violation of Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure under color of law, racial profiling in violation of 14th Amendment equal protection guarantees, unlawful demand for identification without reasonable suspicion, threat of false arrest for asserting constitutional rights, harassment and intimidation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, deliberate indifference to Holloway's 17 complaint pattern. Failure to supervise, train, and discipline despite overwhelming documentation. The complaint attached Holloway's complete personnel record. 17 formal complaints across 9 years of service, 13 complaints showing clear racial bias in stops of black individuals in public recreational spaces, 16 different training program completion certificates covering topics from cultural competency to constitutional policing, 0 suspensions imposed, 0 demotions implemented, 0 meaningful disciplinary action until complaint 17 created federal liability the department couldn't defend or ignore. Phoenix's city attorneys reviewed the case and immediately understood they faced federal court, extensive federal scrutiny, and a federal plaintiff who investigated these cases professionally. Holloway's body camera footage was devastating. Darius's credentials were impeccable. The 17 complaint pattern was legally indefensible. Settlement became inevitable. 22 months after filing, Phoenix settled. $5,300,000 paid to FBI Special Agent Darius Mitchell. The settlement represented the largest amount in Phoenix history for a park stop, reflecting both the severity of constitutional violations and the unique position of a federal law enforcement plaintiff who prosecuted civil rights cases professionally. Officer Travis Holloway was terminated 6 weeks after the park incident. The termination letter was comprehensive and final. Officer Holloway engaged in racial profiling and violated the Fourth Amendment rights of FBI Special Agent Darius Mitchell by demanding identification without reasonable suspicion and threatening arrest for protected activity. His actions occurred in response to a call describing no criminal behavior. Officer Holloway's conduct represents his 17th formal complaint in 9 years of service, with 13 complaints showing identical racial bias in stops of black individuals in public spaces engaged in lawful activities. Despite completion of 16 separate training programs addressing constitutional policing, implicit bias, and professional conduct, Officer Holloway has demonstrated persistent unwillingness to modify discriminatory practices. His violation of a federal agent's constitutional rights while that agent was off duty creates catastrophic institutional liability and fundamentally undermines all cooperative relationships between Phoenix Police Department and federal law enforcement agencies. Employment terminated immediately and permanently. Termination effective date reflects zero tolerance for civil rights violations. Holloway's name was entered into the National Decertification Index, the nationwide database that prevents terminated officers from getting law enforcement jobs in other jurisdictions. His 9-year career in law enforcement ended permanently. Holloway did not appeal the termination decision. Holloway's police union declined to contest the termination after reviewing evidence. Holloway released no public statement and offered no apology to Darius or the community. Darius testified at a Phoenix City Council hearing examining police accountability measures, and later at Department of Justice oversight hearings investigating pattern and practice. I'm an FBI special agent. I investigate civil rights violations professionally. I build federal cases against officers who racially profile, harass civilians, and violate constitutional protections. I know the law thoroughly. I understand the patterns intimately. I recognize the consequences clearly. Officer Holloway stopped me for sitting in a park eating chips. He demanded identification without reasonable suspicion. He threatened arrest when I asserted my Fourth Amendment rights. He did all of this because someone called feeling uncomfortable with my presence. 17 complaints across 9 years, 13 showing identical bias against black people in public spaces. Phoenix PD's response every single time was sending him to training. 16 separate programs: cultural competency, implicit bias, constitutional policing, community engagement. Holloway passed every class, completed every module, learned absolutely nothing that changed his behavior. $5,300,000 is what Phoenix is paying because one officer with 17 documented complaints couldn't imagine a black man belongs in a public park. But money doesn't erase being treated as suspicious for existing in public space. Money doesn't undo the assumption that I'm criminal until proven otherwise. And money won't prevent the next officer with 17 complaints from creating complaint 18 unless departments fundamentally change how they respond to documented patterns requiring termination rather than endless ineffective training. Phoenix implemented comprehensive policy reforms 8 months after settlement. Automatic termination consideration triggered at 10 complaints showing related patterns within any 5-year period. Training effectiveness measured by demonstrated behavior change rather than mere attendance and completion. Mandatory civil rights attorney review of all cases involving complaint patterns before final disposition. Body camera requirements for all interactions in parks and recreational facilities. Annual independent bias auditing examining stop locations, demographics, and outcomes with mandatory public reporting. City Council oversight of all pattern and practice findings. Why do police departments send officers to 16 training programs instead of recognizing after 10 complaints that training isn't working? Comment your thoughts below. This case wasn't about one Tuesday afternoon in November. This was about a police department that sent Travis Holloway to 16 training programs across 9 years, documented 17 formal complaints showing persistent racial bias in stops of black individuals in public recreational spaces, and continued his employment until he racially profiled and threatened to unlawfully arrest a federal agent who literally prosecuted civil rights violations professionally. Darius Mitchell paid the price, stopped while eating chips legally in a public park, treated as suspicious for relaxing in outdoor space, forced to display federal credentials and assert his rights to prevent unlawful arrest. Travis Holloway lost his career. That represents individual consequence for constitutional violations. Phoenix paid $5,300,000 in federal court. That represents institutional accountability through litigation. But both consequences required 17 complaints and 9 years to materialize because training attendance consistently replaced meaningful discipline regardless of whether actual learning or behavior modification occurred. The system documented every complaint meticulously, assigned training after each incident, closed files with certificates proving attendance, and continued Holloway's employment until a federal agent with authority to prosecute became victim 17 and forced accountability through federal litigation. The fundamental question isn't whether this particular story matters or whether this individual case deserves attention. The question is what this case reveals about systemic failure to act on documented patterns. Do training programs actually change behavior when officers demonstrate through repeated identical misconduct that they refuse to change? Do departments genuinely recognize that attendance certificates and completion forms don't equal behavior modification if the behavior continues unchanged? Do they truly understand that professional expertise and federal authority should be respected and valued, whether that expert is prosecuting cases in federal court or simply eating chips at a picnic table? Because if policing systems don't evolve beyond treating training as accountability theater, if departments continue documenting clear patterns without meaningful action until the 17th complaint creates unavoidable federal liability, if officers can ignore 16 comprehensive training programs and still patrol until they victimize a federal agent, then Darius Mitchell represents not just one isolated incident, but definitive proof that current approaches to police accountability fail by deliberate institutional design rather than accidental oversight. Comment below if you agree. 10 complaints showing related patterns within 5 years should trigger automatic termination proceedings. Training effectiveness must be measured by demonstrated behavior change in actual policing, not attendance records and completion certificates. No more training replacing real consequences for repeated documented misconduct. If you believe these stories demand fundamental systemic change in how police departments handle complaint patterns, if you think federal agents investigating civil rights violations shouldn't be racially profiled any more than anyone else, then hit that subscribe button right now. We're documenting how police departments treat training as compliance theater and a documentation exercise rather than a genuine accountability mechanism. We're demanding better from institutions claiming to serve and protect. We're fighting for everyone's right to exist in public spaces without interrogation, investigation, or having to prove they belong there. This isn't about one officer or one federal agent. It's about systems that consistently value paperwork over patterns, certificates over consequences, and endless ineffective training over appropriate termination, even when overwhelming evidence accumulated across years proves definitively that training fundamentally doesn't work for officers who choose not to learn or change their behavior.